month and a half, be able to go from here to courthouse where I work. I'm looking forward to that. And then the last part I'll talk about is Columbia Pike, which is the part that was left off of the Metro map. In the 60s, when they first were planning Metro, the blue line was to have gone out this way. And if you're familiar with this area, you have Skyline here, and then you have like Lincolnia. If you look out, you see these areas where these big tall buildings pop up. They're places where they were originally going to have blue line stations. And they got some big buildings, but they didn't get Metro. So the blue line, was a cost-saving measure. Basically, it was just paired up with the L line there. And this old Main Street kind of got left out of it, and it's the densest area of our county that isn't anywhere near Metro. It's old density. I mean, it's basically a lot of garden apartments and small lot housing, but it's a fairly heavy concentration of population, and a lot of people who use transit, because this line has the biggest bus service, not only that we have, but the biggest bus line in terms of daily ridership in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I live right about here, by the way. So the idea was, what can we do with this? It doesn't have Metro, so it can't accommodate the density that you can expect a Metro, and nobody wants to build it there. Nobody really wants to go through our processes, which I haven't talked a lot about yet, for something that's more modest. So what do we do about that? And so we had to come up with something different. But it is anchored by the Metro station on the east end, and then out here is Skyline and Bailey's Crossroads. But it had become really more and more of an order-oriented strip. This kind of thing I'm sure looks familiar to you. We want it to be more of a main street. The stores that the back of the building faces the street, and we really wanted it to be more like that. By the way, that one is now torn down, and a building looking something like that is under construction today. We also plan to improve the transit with the streetcar. As I said, we have about 15,000 riders a day in this stretch on bus now. We think in the future we want 25,000 or more on transit. The idea to kind of promote this development was to create a new vision for the Pike, but also the tools that would be attractive to somebody who wants to come in, because they neither want to build a 25-story building, nor do we want a 25-story building there. So how do you get them to do it? And we've tried the use of a form-based code, which by now probably everybody's heard of, but there's still relatively not in widespread use. Of course, one of the best examples, I guess, is here in Montgomery. But unlike, what's it called? Community right? What is it? Kentlands, thank you. Unlike Kentlands, which was a greenfield development, this is an existing urban condition with complicated ownership and a lot of things that are already there. And this is one of the first places in the country to really try to use form-based code in that kind of environment. We defined a set of development nodes, basically the busy commercial areas, and created it as an optional zoning category. I won't go into a lot of detail, but essentially we specify the form in the code. The developer essentially has to punch the list, but it's an easier approval for them, a more automatic approval, a little bit more like by right. From our point of view, they basically were using by right or not doing anything, and mostly they weren't doing anything. So there's a 30-day approval for smaller sites and a 55-day approval for larger sites. But the key thing about this is how we did it, which is that we don't do anything in Arlington that doesn't have a lot of public involvement. Anybody who's done any business there has heard of the Arlington Way, and this was no exception. So if you're going to say to people, we're not going to be doing site plan, we're going to give them this expedited process, how do you sell that? Well, the idea was essentially we're going to decide what we want first. We're going to have the public involvement, figure out what it is, make it easier, more certainty for the person to come and develop, but they have to build what we want. So we had like about 127 meetings, I think, and that's not hyperbole. I think the count was 127 community meetings over several years, and then we had the design charrette, in which about 700 people participated over the course of a week. They basically came and drew, and then the planners turned it into something and said, is this what you meant? And we went back and forth until they got it to where they said yes, and created new ideas for the streetscape, the location of public space, the size of buildings, and all that kind of thing, and encompassed it in the code. This to the regulating plan, which basically tells you what kind of buildings you can put depending on what street you're on. It's very visual, if you've seen form-based codes, so the average person could look at it and have some idea what goes there. Fenestration, parking, all that kind of thing. And we have the first three projects, they're all either built or under construction. This one's about to get underway. That first corner I showed you, this was the first plan. This project came in within a month or two after the code was approved for this site. That's what it looked like 3-4 years ago. This is what it looked like yesterday. So as you can see, we preserved the old, the legacy building street front here because we're trying to keep in the oldest part of it the feel of downtown that is there already, but incorporated higher density. And this is about as big a building as you can get. Most of the Pike is 6 stories or less. This one got 2 bonus floors for the preservation. But then there's going to be more retail than there was in the first place, because over here, what you didn't see was we had a parking lot and we had a power substation. So now you have residential units and then retail on the ground floor. We've got 40,000 square feet of retail. There's 5 storefronts right here, and 3 or 4 of them are already leased. The building's just opening now. This is again is a site to the west where there's was a small building with a parking lot basically. This is under construction right now. This I told you was the Safeway. This is the building that was approved for the site. I went by this morning. They have it up to the top. They have some of the facade going on. Not enough to make a good picture, but the next time I do this, hopefully I'll have a pretty picture of it. And then what is now a big shopping center with a big grocery store parking lot, mostly in a small grocery store. They're going to start this month, I believe, development that provides the new grocery store actually on the second level here, retail on the ground floor, and then residential units over it, and then a new public plaza. So those are some examples. Now, people always ask me about the things we do, and I can go into more detail when we question and answer about the mechanisms we use and how they might be relevant or not relevant to anybody else. But I do think there are some things that are universal, and I always tell them I think there are 3 things that you got to get right, or none of this is going to work. My 3 big rules are: first, what I call the vital quarter mile. Second, mixed use, and third, design for the pedestrian. So let me give you the first one. Again, everybody knows a bit about the quarter-mile walk, but it can't really be overstated because if you look at transit service, 75% of the people who are going to go to a transit station are going to be within the first quarter mile. Now, you talk about this and people say, well, you can walk more than a quarter mile. Why can't people walk half a mile or 3/4 of a mile? It's not that hard to walk a mile. And there are people who will do it. There are people in this room who won't hesitate to walk a mile. But the reality is if you put a station somewhere, 75% of the people are going to be from that quarter mile. So if you start out with your station over here and the development's all over here, you're throwing away a lot of the catchment of the station area. Secondly, if you move the development all out here, you're basically reducing the efficiency. You're going to have more car and less transit usage. So that first quarter mile is tremendously important. Don't waste it. The second quarter mile to half mile gets you to 90%. So if you do your geometry, there's a lot more area in the second ring, if you remember your pi r squared, but you're only picking up a little more ridership. It does really drop off sharply, but it's really heavy in here, and you can build a whole lot of stuff inside a quarter mile. Again, this is an example of the courthouse station I showed earlier, and this is indicating the mixture of use, which gets you 18-hour days, which gets you places that aren't dead, don't vacate at night, or vice versa. And then, of course, if it isn't walkable, it's not transit-oriented. This is where we play Find the Pedestrian. Have you seen the pedestrian? Look fast, look fast. Ah, there he is. Okay, so, did I say again what I think is important? There are a lot of other details. The rest is details, and we can talk about things like getting the design right and public space, affordable housing. But you got to start with the big stuff. And with that, I think I will stop and say thank you and look forward to your questions.